Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this CE Week event for single-use plastics. We will just give a couple of minutes while people join the session, and yeah, we'll kick off shortly. Right, good afternoon to those of you joining. We're going to start the session in a couple of minutes. We're just letting people come in, so we will be starting in a minute or so. Okay, I think we will make a start. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this CE Week session on what's next for single-use plastics. My name's Liz Horsfield, and I work for London. In case you're not sure who London are, we are a partnership of the Mayor of London and London boroughs, and our mission is to revolutionise our relationship with stuff. And we do this in a variety of ways by engaging initiatives that create better and different choices for businesses and consumers so that we can avoid plastic waste where it's not needed and encourage responsible disposal where it is used. So the aim of this event is to look at the issue of single-use plastic packaging, the situation that we're in and where we need to be and how we get there. It's also a really good opportunity for us to showcase some of the great work that's going on around London and beyond on moving us towards a low plastic economy. We've got a fantastic panel lined up for you this afternoon with a huge range of knowledge and experience and really great insights to share. So I'm just going to quickly run through the agenda for today. So I'm going to briefly set the scene, and then we're going to ask all of the panelists to introduce themselves and talk about the work that they are doing on single-use plastic. We're then going to have a discussion with the panel on how we make progress on reducing plastics. And we will also have time for questions from the floor at the end. We have got a couple of housekeeping things to run through with you as well. So this webinar is being recorded and it will be available to view afterwards on our CE Week website and our YouTube channel. And we're very much welcoming questions for the panel. Can I ask that if you have a question, you type it into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, not into the chat function, because we're only going to keep an eye on one channel at a time. So any questions in the Q&A, please. It may be that the panel members can answer some of those questions as we go through, and we will answer as many as we can at the end of the session. Okay, so just to set the scene, Today's session is all about single-use plastics, and I'm sure that everyone here today will recognise the problem that single-use plastics cause. Plastic is a high carbon material that lasts for thousands of years in the environment, and when incinerated, gives off climate gases. Using it for only minutes before discarding it from single-use packaging is damaging and often completely unnecessary practice. So in London, plastic makes up approximately 9% of the household waste stream, with plastic packaging accounting for nearly 70% of this, and the majority of that plastic packaging is single-use. We know that globally only 14% of plastic makes it to recycling plants, with a third being lost into the environment. And we know that we can't recycle our way out of this problem. I thought it would be useful to just recap on recent and upcoming legislation around plastics. So in 2015, single-use plastic bags, carrier bags were banned from being given out. Well, a charge was introduced rather by supermarkets, and that has reduced the amount of plastic bags being given out by major supermarkets by 95% since 2015. In 2020, the government banned plastic stirrers, straws and cotton buds. And in his London Environment Strategy, the Mayor of London has made a commitment to reduce food waste and the associated plastic packaging by 50%, including rolling out a programme of water fountains across the city. There are upcoming government reforms on packaging, including extended producer responsibility, which should see a move away from non-recyclable packaging being produced, and a deposit return scheme, which should see a reduction in litter as well. And yet, despite all of those things, in my kitchen, despite my best efforts, plastic still makes up a large bulk of my waste every week. I have only just started being able to reuse my coffee cup in my local coffee shop after COVID. There's been a difficult couple of years with COVID in terms of reducing single-use plastic. So there's clearly still work to do to make unnecessary single-use plastic a thing of the past. But fortunately, we've got a great lineup of speakers today to talk about the work that they're doing in this space. They come from a range of organisations, local government, producers, retailers, charity sector and local communities. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves and talk about what they're doing. And I know that what they've all got to say will be fascinating and encouraging for everyone. So to start with, I'm going to ask Jane Martin from City to Sea to tell us about World Refill Day and the work that City to Sea are doing on bringing refill to as wide an audience as possible. So over to you, Jane.
Great, thanks Liz, and thanks for setting the scene there. I'm just going to do the usual screen share thing, and hopefully are you seeing a full screen? Let's just wait per slide there. You've got the main. Great.
Yeah,
okay,
that's great, thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me today. It's excellent timing because today is World Refill Day. This is our big public awareness campaign that we do annually to raise awareness of the refill and reuse space, to celebrate what's happening and what businesses are doing in the space, to increase consumer demand, to mobilize communities, and just to celebrate all the good work that's been done so far and try and build that market for refill and reuse. It's a campaign that we've been running for a number of years. It didn't run in the first year of lockdown, and it seems like a long time ago that we thought, will we ever do World Refill Day again? Will we be back on the streets refilling and shopping? Our campaign launched this morning, so hopefully you guys will start to see some of the media reach and some of the activity that's coming through, and I know some of you have already started to share the assets. It is an international campaign. We're getting some really great coverage in Japan already today, and yeah, it really is a global phenomenon now. So the campaign is designed to engage consumers with refill and reuse, making reusables more accessible via our app, rebuilding habits and confidence post-pandemic. I know we're going to come on to that. Normalising refill and reuse. And we've got this global media campaign and an event this evening at Tate Modern. It's also a really important platform for businesses and policymakers to use. So we are celebrating all the businesses that are in the refill and reuse space, offering that support for businesses that are accepting reusables again in cafes, as you mentioned. But we're also holding brands, businesses and government to account. And we've got an open letter to the top 5 polluters based on Break Free from Plastic's global audit, which you can sign up to. Hundreds of businesses have already signed to really call for more action in the refill and reuse space and more investment. Over the past 6 weeks to 2 months, we've been working with the Mayor of London office on a bespoke behaviour change campaign for London. And we're very lucky to be able to do some research in London of Londoners that I'm going to share a few of the insights with you later on the first question. But if you're out and about on the tube, probably rather warm today, and in the train stations, you should be seeing our out-of-home advertising. There's lots of assets on social media, and really that was designed to build confidence back up in refill and reuse post-pandemic, particularly in water, and get people out using those water fountains, but also raising awareness of the fact it doesn't have to be a water fountain. You can go and get a refill in one of our 4,000, I think, refill stations in London, the cafes that offer refill as well. And finally, just to come on to how our app supports refill. Traditionally, our app has been around refill on the go and supporting people who are carrying their own reusables, like their bottle or their coffee cup, into store. But we're developing the app to also support borrow and return on the go. As Liz mentioned, with DRS and coming to market, we're seeing a lot more borrow return schemes. We're working with one in Bournemouth and one in Bristol, and we want people to be able to use the app to find out where they can borrow a cup, for example, but also where they can return it. So that's a new progression for us, and hopefully over the next year or so, if you're using the app, you'll start to see these different icons coming up. If you're looking for zero waste shopping, for example, where you could potentially borrow a container for your cereal, or borrow a coffee cup because you don't want to carry one around in your handbag all day. Finally from me, and I think I've just hit the 4-minute mark, so I'm expecting Liz to pop up any minute, but really if you haven't already got involved with World Refill Day, please do just check out our social media and share some of our assets. If you're doing something in the refill and reuse space, now's the day to celebrate it. Get out there and share your story. And if you want to get involved further with refill, I'll put my details in the chat so that you can just reach out to me after the session. But otherwise, I hope you all have a great day and that you rehydrate a lot and don't get too hot out there in London. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jane. That was really interesting. Great to hear about the relaunch of World Refill Day, and yeah, happy World Refill Day to everyone on the call. That was great. We are going to go next to Diana Sterck, who is the CEO of Sustainable Merton, Merton's local environmental charity working to make Merton a circular borough. So Diana, over to you.
Thank you, Liz. Right, I hope that's going to work. Here we are. So we are Merton's local environmental charity, and our overall aim is to inform, educate and change people's behaviours. We principally work in 4 areas, which is waste, energy, air quality and food. And under the food agenda, we concentrate on food growing and food insecurity. But today I'm going to tell you about 2 waste reduction and circular economy projects that are principally all about plastic. So the first one here, Wimbledon in the Loop, was principally a behaviour change campaign, and you can see, I'll leave you to read lots of the statistics there, but it really focused on the food on the go, and it was a partnership project. Obviously you can't do any of this stuff in the public domain without the local authority involvement, and also the waste collection service, which in Merton is Veolia. So what we did is we started off with a bin audit, which showed actually that only 1 in 2 plastic bottles, 50%, were going into the recycling bins. I think we'll all know that recycling bins are particularly confusing, particularly when it comes to coffee cups. So at the end of this, we did, as I say, a lot of information sharing. You can see that the bins there were badged with information to inform people what they should be doing. And at the end of that, 90% of those bottles were then being correctly put in the recycling bin. So that was really the aim, and we are looking to replicate that model across the borough. Now, the wheel here, this is a new project for us, and it is a circular economy project focusing on both waste minimisation, principally through repair, reuse and repurposing, and also upcycling there. You can see there just some ideas of the work that we're doing. And the whole project is really about building local networks and connecting them. What we found in Merton is there are multiple initiatives going on that really struggle with their own capacity to grow that initiative, to actually link and connect with sources of help and other people. So this project is really about building knowledge and capacity and connections. And it focuses on upcycling furniture, textiles, but also obviously plastics. My next slide here is just really an illustration. I mentioned that we focus on growing in the charity, and here is an illustration of people that are using single-use plastics, reusing them, repurposing them. So we have plastic bottles there. You can see we have a lateral flow kit at the bottom there, being used as plant identifiers. So I think people are very creative actually in the way that they can reuse and repurpose single-use plastics, but obviously we're all aware that we would rather not have them around at all. And that's my very short presentation. Lots more on our website, sustainablemerton.org, and please keep in touch. If you'd like to find anything else out about what we do, I know my colleague Ramya, who focuses on the Wheel project, is in the audience, and we'd be delighted to connect with you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Thank you very much, Diana. That was great. And yeah, really brilliant results from your on-the-go recycling trial. That's really interesting to hear about. Thank you. So we are going to move next to Andrew Hagger from Richmond Council, who is the climate change lead for Richmond Council, who's going to tell us more about the One World Living programme and their work on plastics, how local authorities are working together on that. So over to you, Andrew.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Liz. Just going to start the presentation. Hopefully everyone can see that. Great. Yeah. So I'll just talk quickly about One World Living. So this is one of the London Council's 7 climate programmes. So London Council have come together to take some action around climate change. And One World Living is a programme that aims to address and reduce consumption-based emissions across London, with the target to reduce consumption emissions by 2/3 by 2030. And we've identified 4 key areas that we're going to take action on. So we've got plastics, textiles, food and electricals. And I'm the lead for the plastics bit. So myself and London Borough of Richmond upon Thames are doing that. And the programme is based around circular economy. It's very much a circular economy approach that we're taking towards this. So in terms of the plastics, a bit of context and some of the challenges. So we're focusing on single-use plastics within the plastics workstream because it's a really high throughput. Liz mentioned around, single-use plastic is used for moments basically, and then it's disposed of. So it's a really big driver of demand for plastic. And so trying to address that will reduce it. And plastic is a big issue for people when we engage with people around climate change generally. plastic comes out as a big issue for people, and something that people want to talk about and take action on as well. And one of the issues is that plastic is endemic. It's in everything we buy, but we don't really actively go off and seek to buy some plastic. It's just there in the other stuff that we need. So we need to try to do something about that and address it. And that's what the programme is aiming to do. So we've set out a vision for this, and this is very ambitious, but it is what we'd like to see in the future. So one of the key things is around the narrative around plastic has changed. So it's seen as a limited and precious resource, and that we can't really produce any more of it, and it's unthinkable to throw it away. So stuff like refill being normal, our rivers and streets are free of plastic litter. The plastics that we are using are reusable, they're recyclable, or they're recycled, or they're compostable. And that's a really key thing there. And that there's basically little to no single-use plastic in use or in production. So we set out some pillars for the plan. One is, and we've taken these from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, who do amazing work around circular economy. They're really good sort of source, like London is, around finding out more about circular economy. So the first one is around eliminating the plastic we don't need. The second one's around circulating the plastic we do need, and then innovating as well to make sure that what the plastic we do have is reusable or recyclable or it's compostable. And we've developed an action plan, and sort of these are a range of the actions. I won't go through all of them, but the key actions that we've got have got sort of little stars next to them. This is around establishing a low plastic communities network, which is already in place. London have set this up, and it's a really, really good resource for those who are taking action on plastic. Looking at the policies for local councils within London. So we are walking the walk as well as talking the talk around taking action as organisations on plastic. So we're looking at what we're doing internally. Developing some support and advice for small businesses around low plastic approaches, because we know that small businesses might have a bit more of a challenge. They don't have the buying power, purchasing power around controlling the packaging in the same way that sort of large chains or supermarkets might do. And then it's also around promoting and supporting refill options around London. So City to Sea, you've already heard they do fantastic work around this, and it's about sort of building that and doing even more around it. And the other one we're looking at is around tackling the lunchtime plastic waste throwaway economy. So basically, are there options around refill so that we're not buying things in plastic containers, then they get thrown out? Quite often you might be out and about, maybe in work, and so it's more difficult to actually recycle things because you might not have access to it or know where to go. So actually reuse approach might be something that could work there, and so that's something we're looking at doing a pilot on, trying to look at options around that. So in terms of things we're doing, so we've got that low plastics communities network already set up. We're collecting really good examples of low plastic work going on across London. So if you have really great examples, please do get in contact, let us know. We're building up like a repository of various different sort of projects that are going on. We're developing these policies that all London boroughs can adapt around low plastic, with the aim of producing sort of a tiered system where people who want to kind of make sure they're doing the basics can do that. Those who want to be a bit more ambitious can enter in at that level, and those who want to really push the boat out on this can then do that. And then we're also looking at how we can support those refill and small businesses, and then we're developing some policy asks for government as well around what they need to do around helping reduce single-use plastic. And this image I've got on the screen here, came from something we did as part of Circular Economy Week last year. We did an event with Richmond residents, and these are the things that came out as the pieces of waste that people really get annoyed about. And you can see plastic comes out, and single-use plastic especially comes out as a really big issue for people there. So this is from sort of 50 people who were talking about this, and this is what came out. And this is a key driver, and I show this all the time because this is what people are concerned about, what residents and citizens in London are concerned about. So I'll stop there. Look forward to further discussions in the panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andrew. That was great. Yeah, really interesting to see on that last slide there. It's kind of encouraging to see that's what people are worried about, that plastic is a thing that annoys them, because I guess we need people to be annoyed by it to do something about it. Okay, so we are going to move on to our fourth speaker. So I'd like to introduce Bettina Maidment from Plastic Free Hackney. We have two members of Plastic Free Hackney here today. We have Daisy Hutchison as well, but Bettina is going to introduce Plastic Free Hackney to us, who are a not-for-profit campaign group committed to creating a cleaner and greener environment starting in Hackney. So over to you, Bettina.
Great, thank you very much, Liz. So yeah, I'm Bettina and I run Plastic Free Hackney alongside Daisy. So Plastic Free Hackney really started as a sort of personal journey back in around 2017 of just trying to reduce my own plastic consumption. I just kind of had this sort of breakdown moment of just kind of, this isn't enough is enough, and you know, we need to do something about this. And as I was doing this, I was thinking, well, surely I'm not the only person that's getting frustrated with all this plastic packaging, and thought, well, wouldn't it be much easier if we lived in a society that facilitated those changes? And hence Plastic Free Hackney was born, at which point Daisy got on board, and we decided to make Hackney plastic free. So spoiler alert, that hasn't happened, but over the years we've sort of tried to inch our way along slowly but surely. So we run a number of events. So a really popular event is our monthly pollution picks. We call them pollution picks because we felt that litter is just too benign a term. You know, it's an industry created word to put the onus back on the individual, that this isn't their problem, it's the individual's problem. So we run these pollution picks, which we very much know are not an answer to the problem. They are very much sticking plaster, but they are a good way to get the community together and just to kind of see the effects of this pollution on our local environment. You know, I think people think environment and they think Amazon rainforest, but you know, we have rivers and we have green spaces in Hackney, and you know, our local environment, we feel it's really important that you start local and it scales up. Other events that we do are awareness events, where we just, you know, speak to members of the public and talk to them about different things that they can change individually. We also, our sort of current series of workshops that we run, these are sort of the most popular things that we do at the moment. So we run a series of make your own workshops, whether that's toiletries or cleaning products or, you know, discussion workshops about plastic free periods. And these are incredibly popular and they allow us to speak to a really wide and diverse number of people in our community. We sell them as low cost. So it's make your own low cost toiletries, as that's always a way to get people into the room before we sort of dig down into our ulterior motive, which is to get people to stop using so much plastic and stuff, really, because I guess that's another thing that's kind of happened. We've really realized that whilst it's very much a plastic problem, it's also, you know, there's a consumption problem and sort of hence circular economy and so on. So yes, we have these workshops and actually COVID in a way allowed us to sort of move them online and talk to a lot more people, and they've just proved really popular. And so once we get people in the room, we try to, you know, we just discuss it. They just allow, whilst people are making things and doing the things themselves, it just allows people to have those conversations and to see what are the barriers, why people are not doing it or what they would like to do more, and so on and so forth. What we really think is important is knowledge sharing. So we're kind of totally open source. You know, it's not, if you want to run one of our workshops, great. All the information is on our website. You know, we would love people just to disseminate that message further and further. We also sort of do lots of sharing with all of the other amazing local community groups in Hackney, as we feel that, you know, these need to be amplified, and that's how we're going to, I'm just very aware that Liz is now there, so I'm just wrapping up. Yes, so that's basically us. We're just a local community group trying to sort of make changes on a small scale, but hopefully that's amplified.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Bettina. And I know we will hear some more from you soon about the challenges that people face. So we're looking forward to that as well. Thank you. And our fifth speaker today is Catherine Conway. So Catherine is from Unpackaged, and she set up the world's first modern zero waste shop, and Unpackaged has now developed into a leading consultancy in sustainable retailing. So we're very pleased to have you here today, Catherine, and I believe you're going to tell us more about the Refill Coalition, which is an exciting development in retail. So over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for inviting me, Liz. So my name is Catherine. I set up the first modern zero waste store in 2006 when, like Bettina, I was also depressed at the amount of packaging that I was creating in my own life and decided to set up a shop. So we've been through quite a few iterations since, and now we mainly work as consultants with bigger businesses trying to shift their behaviours and how they do things. So I thought today I would just tell you about the Refill Coalition. So the Refill Coalition is a group of leading retailers and equipment suppliers who are already working in the zero waste space. And what we're effectively doing is trying to redesign the supply chain to optimize it and try and reach a scale of reuse and refill that will allow more mainstream retailers to expand into their stores. So what we've done is taken the hopper that many of you will recognize from a zero waste store, and we've effectively optimized it for the supply chain. So a bit like the way a beer keg goes around a supply chain and you just have the fancy taps in store, but the beer keg is totally unbranded and anybody can use it and it's an industry standard. That's what we're trying to create for refill. So really at the minute, if you're a retailer and you want to do refill in store with these original kind of hoppers, you're effectively running them in the same way that a small independent zero waste store would. So you've got staff out the back who are washing and cleaning these dispensers manually, which will just never ever work. It's adding too much cost into the model and it just doesn't fit with how supermarkets like to do things. It means you'll never be able to put it in a city centre store, the discounters will never put it in, so it's just really not a system that can scale. So there are four main challenges we're trying to tackle. So one is the operational cost and burden of what we call the manual refill system. The other one is the back of house requirements, because at the minute they all need these big kind of wash stations back of house. The customer experience, I think we would all agree, is not what we want it to be. Quite often if you want to go and do refilling in a store, it's all in a sort of siloed area, and really if we want to mainstream this, we need people to find refill coffee where they would find normal coffee. And also at the minute, it's not zero waste. You know, people are getting bulk packaging through the supply chain and it's probably better than the single-use packaging, but what we really need is a whole end-to-end system with no packaging at all. So we've taken our vessel design, and the way it works is, so our logistics partner, CHEP, will send those clean vessels to a supplier, so any say cornflake supplier, who are going to fill them, send them all out through the normal distribution chain. So the whole idea is to use the supply chains that already exist, and that way we don't add cost into the model. So then these vessels, which are optimized for pallets and roll cages, are going to arrive at the back of store. And then the person working in the store can just clip the front on and add it in. Shopper comes and shops from it. And then once they're empty, this is the really key bit for optimization, is they just go back through the supply chain. They get washed, they get cleaned, and then they come back out again. With our partner Ocado, we're also trialing a sort of a hybrid model, which is, I guess we're calling it a pre-fill, in the sense that it's based on the same vessel shape and size. Oh, sorry, the same shape but not the same size, but it's pre-filled with a sort of a bulk amount, say about 3 kilos of popular items that you would go through, like pasta and rice and things like that. So we're calling it the mini bulk, and the idea is it's super optimized for online deliveries, and it can come back through the supply chain. And the really key bit is this size of the aperture, because then that means that we can optimize the filling and the washing, and that will help the system scale. So we've done a lot of modelling so far. At the minute, sorry, I apologise if there's any noise in the background. We've done a lot of modelling so far, and we can show that our space efficiencies create real cost benefits throughout the supply chain. The operational benefits are there versus single-use plastic packaging, as well as manual refills. In fact, some of our modelling is showing that it's going to be even more efficient and therefore cost-effective to deliver goods through the supply chain using our vessel than it would in single-use plastic packaging, which is effectively the holy grail, because that's how we don't add cost into the system. And then, as you can see from we did an early stage life cycle analysis where we compared our vessel to sort of 6 or 7 different single-use categories, and in every single impact category our system worked better than the other ones. So we've got some funding from the Smart Sustainable Plastic Packaging Fund, which is through Innovate UK, and we're going to run a 28-month trial. So these hoppers should be live in store in January 2023, and the aim is to really test them across a representative sample of different store types, different locations across the UK, different demographics, run some proper life cycle analysis testing, and run some proper consumer insights work, so that we can really understand how people are reacting to these and how we might scale it. And we've targeted that we may achieve a 2.4 million unit saving across the 28 months and an additional reduction in secondary and tertiary packaging as well. So that's really just a snapshot of what we're doing. If you go to refillcoalition.com, there's a sign-up sheet, and we're interested in anybody who wants to talk to us, because the whole idea about this is to turn it into an industry standard. Just to give you a very sort of brief overview, is what we're trying to do is not create a proprietary standard that says you have to buy into our system for this to work. The idea is once we've got through this trial, all of the interoperability between all of the systems becomes published. So anyone that exists in the supply chain, making scales, POS kit, fixtures and fittings, dispensers, any manufacturer, anybody can get involved with this system, because we think that's the best way to scale it. So I'm going to stop there, and thank you so much. And once again, I apologise if there was any noise.
Thanks, Catherine. And yeah, don't worry. We could hear you fine. That's brilliant. Thank you ever so much. Really interesting to hear about that. Really exciting to hear about the trial and the possible outcomes from there. So yeah, thank you to all the speakers, and thank you all very much for sticking to your times as well, which is great because it means that we've got plenty of time for questions. I'm sure that everyone will agree it's great to hear from such a range of speakers working in different ways, from the the hyperlocal neighbourhood level to national. I think it gives us a really good picture of what is happening and what can happen. We do have some questions lined up for the panel, so I'm going to kick off with those. Just to reiterate that if you have questions for the panel, I know I've got loads, but I will let people from the floor have them first. If you want to type them into the Q&A box, and towards the end of the session we will pick those up, so please don't type questions into chat because they won't be seen. So I'm going to start off with our first question to the panel, which is, as we've discussed already, we've touched on progress on reducing single-use plastic stalled during COVID as water fountains were closed and reusable cups refused by shops. Have we started to regain that ground, and what else needs to happen now to move beyond where we were in 2020? So I'm going to go to Jane first, if that's okay to talk about that, and then I will bring in some others. So Jane, how are we doing?
Well, you're absolutely right. Yes, we did slip back during the pandemic, and I thought I'd just start. In my presentation, I mentioned we'd done some research very, very recently into Londoners' attitudes and behaviours. So I thought I'd just take it from the horse's mouth, really, and say that 57% of people that we interviewed, was quite a large base, said that their concerns around hygiene had increased as a result of the pandemic. So, and obviously anecdotally and through the research we do, we had lots of reusable cups were not accepted, all the water fountains closed down, everything that you bought in a food to go outlet came wrapped in single-use plastic and then sort of wrapped again. So there's lots of unfounded fears there. The good news is that from our research, 61% of people in London said they were using a reusable water bottle to reduce plastic waste. And there's a growth in people, not that I want to make people feel guilty, but there is a growth in people feeling this sort of sense of guilt of buying bottled water, and that's on the rise, particularly in younger groups. So that's a result of our research, and I'm just going to pull out sort of 4 points, I think, really around what can help us move beyond, around price and cost, which I think potentially touches on Vasca Busak's, I hope I've got your name right, question in the question section, also investment in innovation, legislation and collaboration. So when we did our research, a lot of people that we spoke to, so 59% of people stated that saving money was the most important driver in using a reusable water bottle. So that's a key stat there, and we need to roll that through into other categories. So one of the key asks for us is to make reusables cheaper than getting items in single use. Now I'll go and get my Body Shop shampoo refill, and once I've bought the container that they want me to use, my shampoo is then slightly cheaper. So that's a good result. And also we're working with BCP Council on a cup scheme at the moment and making sure that a reusable option is cheaper than a single-use option. Moving on to coffee cups. So yeah, lots of rejection of coffee cups, but and you may have noticed we did some petitioning of Starbucks, and we had a contactless coffee campaign just trying to kind of just deal with that myth that you were going to catch COVID off somebody's coffee cup. We petitioned Starbucks, as I said, but what we're seeing now is a lot more investment in that space. So from the big guys, from McDonald's to Starbucks now having reusable cup schemes, to, you know, city to sea. Actually, today we've announced that we're launching a reusable cup scheme in Bristol, which is kind of terrifying and really, really exciting at the same time. It's supported by the Eco Surety Exploration Fund. So there's money coming in to drive this innovation, as Catherine was talking about. Their Innovate UKRI project, which is really exciting. We're supporting one looking at the retail sector with an organisation called RIRI. So there's money coming in and the innovation is happening. In terms of legislation, although it's really delayed, and we were gutted about the delays to the Environment Bill that we saw during COVID, things are starting to pick up. And you mentioned EPR and DRS. Yes, for us, our ask of that is that, you know, there's real consistency across the different devolved governments, because it's so hard for businesses to be managing different legislative contexts from Europe to Scotland to England. So we really want to see real certainty to help businesses to plan. And I think, you know, the final point for me is around business collaboration, and it was really great to hear Catherine talking about how they're going to share, you know, those learnings from the Unpackaged project, because we need to kind of see packaging standardization, this sort of sharing of logistics and infrastructure, because it does require investment, it does cost to convert to reuse. And, you know, just support of business in general facing this kind of completely existential crisis of changing the business psychology, moving from that sort of more to again and again and again. I'll pass on to Catherine now. I'm sure we can give you some other insights.
Yeah, Catherine, I was going to ask if you wanted to come in response to Jane there. There's obviously lots around business.
Yeah, I mean, this question of cost, which I know has come up in the chat. The absolute reality is we've optimized the supply chain for 50 years to depend on selling units of single-use packaging. So anything that tries to change that is going to come with a cost. However, we're very capable of subsidizing things. You know, the government subsidizes things. We subsidize fossil fuels. We subsidize big, well-known online retailers, distribution centres. You know, we could choose what to subsidise. And also brands are very used to doing price promotions, so they could also choose to subsidise things in that area. So I do think things are going to move, but I think it's probably unrealistic to think that we can somehow change a whole system without adding some cost in somewhere. However, if you start looking at it in the way that we've been trying to do this modelling work in our project, where actually you try and look at optimizing volumes of bulk goods going through the supply chain, when you compare the amount of, for example, if you can cube out, it's very geeky, but if you can cube out a vessel of bulk liquid versus lots of bottles with thin necks, you suddenly find you can get up to 20% more product on a pallet. Now, once you start talking about that over the scale of a large retailer, I mean, that's a huge amount of cost saving and a huge carbon saving as well in terms of the transport. So I think it's also slightly changing that narrative within business from, oh, we know we should be doing this, our customers kind of want it, but it's going to be a hassle, to actually how can we try and find that win for business as well, where they also get to save cost. And I think at the minute within the cost of living crisis, I know we don't necessarily like that term, but the fact is that everybody, you know, is really tightening their belts at the minute, and actually looking at how these kind of products can help people save money as well is really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Catherine. That's great. Did anyone else on the panel want to come in on that question? Okay, so I think there's a lot to think about in terms of how we move forward, and your points were both really interesting. I think obviously the cost of living and the cost of these things is really important to people, and it's really encouraging to hear that there are ways that can work. I think the question of subsidising is a really interesting one, Catherine, for us to think about as well. So I'm going to move on to the next question, which is more citizen focused, at least initially this one. So and this one is, I'm going to ask Diana to speak first. So what are the barriers for people to reduce and reuse plastic as a way of shopping and living? And how do we continue to break those down?
Thank you, Liz. Well, it's an enormous question, isn't it? But I think, you know, most people are busy people who are looking for convenience. they haven't got time to shop around. I mean, zero shops are amazing places, but you know, sometimes they're not very close to people, and people generally just go into their local supermarket, don't they? So I think that whole convenience has to come into it. And it's mentioned there about the cost of living, and obviously price points are critical at the moment. But I do think there are solutions that you know, can address that. So I just wanted to say, you know, how many of you participated in the big plastic count that went on? Oh my God, I mean, I was absolutely astounded. So in my household of 2 people, we are actually throwing away almost 3,000 pieces of single-use plastic every year. I mean, if you just multiply it up by your street, let alone anywhere else. But 98% of mine was food and drink related. So to me, toiletries, you can really address that quite easily these days, because there are so many outlets that sell toiletries in either reusable or non-plastic packaging. So to me, what are the solutions? So there has to be more education for consumers on really understanding the impacts of single-use plastics, because I think people just think they put it in their recycling bin and they've done what they need to do, and that's where we are with a lot of people. So I think a lot more education in terms of reuse, and obviously not purchasing single-use plastics. I think for businesses, they have to be supported in investment to move away from single-use packaging. And I love the example from Ocado, because all that packaging that I've talked about that I throw away comes from Ocado, because that's where I shop. So, you know, and I always remember a supermarket saying to me once, you know, everyone wants cucumbers wrapped in that horrible plastic stuff that cucumbers come in, because it obviously they last longer, supposedly. I'm not sure that's the case, actually, and I would be delighted if I was sent a cucumber that wasn't in that awful plastic stuff. But so at the end of the day, my final sort of point on that is, I do think that the supermarkets are the drivers in changing consumer behaviour. And actually, if they don't change, they should be taxed on that plastic that they are producing. So let's help them by investing in them. But actually, at the end of the day, if they don't change, then they should be taxed on that, and that will change the price points to make non-plastic packaged goods as cost effective as plastic packaged goods. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Yeah, I mean, it's not impossible, is it? It's been done elsewhere, that packaging for fruit and vegetables doesn't exist now. It's been banned. So, you know, these things are possible. I'd like to bring in Daisy, if I may, because I was really interested in in Bettina's introduction about bringing people in from the low cost element, and then while they're there, sort of, you know, persuading them. What do you find people's motivations are when they join your sessions, and you know, what barriers do they have in terms of reducing their single-use plastic, do you think?
I think that just like Diana was saying, that obviously I think, you know, the barriers very much come in 3 parts. So there's availability, cost and time. So Bettina and I are both on an individual level, and I'm sure many people listening to this have done our very level best to reduce all of our own personal consumption, but that requires you to change the way that you shop. So that's meaning not going to supermarkets anymore, because simply at the moment, by visiting supermarkets, you're going somewhere where they're not going to provide you the option of items being unpackaged. And we find personally quite frustrating that although obviously things are in a trial basis, that if a supermarket is providing something loose, it also provides the packaged option. So next door to your loose apples is the bag of apples. Now, if the supermarkets want to be doing something more confident, there'd be an either or. just drop the bagged apples. In terms of cost and time, the barrier of a more sustainable lifestyle is, I think, runs into the real problem of that there's been a lot of promotion on social media of these kind of beautiful pantries of matching mason jars, and everybody's spending loads of money on their fancy bits, and that's actually incredibly detrimental to the environmental cause in general. I think it's really alienating, and I think it's just another way of consuming, really. So we tried very hard to move against that direction, and the thing that generally gets people in through the door with our workshops and talking with us is it's really about being thrifty, about thinking about how can I do this? Do I need 3 products to do this one thing, or could I do it with one? And actually the sense of empowerment that we get when talking to people about making their own products is really powerful, because nobody's going to save the world by making their own deodorant, but it does start you then questioning the whole cycle and system of why am I buying a little plastic tube of Shore deodorant that costs £1 for basically a little bit of liquid in something that cannot be recycled in that form of plastic packaging, as opposed to something that's really straightforward that you can make with bicarbonate of soda and a coconut oil and bit of corn flour, and then that's it. And you save, you're saving money, you're making things, and really importantly, so much of our project is about information sharing. So making all that information available to people, and the hope being, and what we really talk to people about is taking that information, sharing it with other people that they know, taking it into their communities, and kind of just buying less stuff. There's a real line that comes to buying less stuff. Also, I just want to say that we are deeply skeptical of the supermarket policy of now accepting soft plastics, because that feels like a very much out of sight, out of mind scenario. And how many more plastic benches do we actually need to have made from soft plastic packaging? People we're too trusting of supermarkets that we take things in and they're going to be reused in a helpful way. And actually, as we all know, all of these products aren't being recycled. If they're making it into that chain, they're being downcycled.
I just seen Catherine's hand go up, so I just want to bring you in, Catherine, in response to that.
I was just I'm not in any ways responding on behalf of all supermarkets, but I do know that a lot of those trial film take back schemes are about effectively trying to create a marketplace for flexible recycling, which is something that we have to solve. Now, I agree with you that I don't think it is a solution, in the sense that we're far from being able to turn flexible packaging back into flexible packaging, but they do have to try and solve it somehow. So I think a lot of those trials that they're doing is industry's way of starting to try and get some movement in the area of flexible recycling, rather than an end in itself, which is probably what they would tell you if they were sitting on this call. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting point, because actually some of the reforms coming from government are that we're all going to be collecting our flexible plastics for recycling from from our houses in the next few years. So actually there is an argument that getting people used to separating that out can be a good thing. But I absolutely agree with you, Daisy, in terms of less stuff, more thrift. Doesn't have to be new ways of doing things. It can just be doing less things, buying less things to start with. So yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So I'm going to move on to our third question, which is what opportunities can you see for organisations, government, charities, businesses, community groups to work together to cut plastic production and promote reuse and make it a practical and affordable alternative for everyone? So I'm going to go to Andrew first on this one.
Thanks, Liz. I think looking at it from sort of like my role as in a local authority, I think it's around trying to work together and coordinate things and try to bring things together to showcase the alternatives and to showcase the alternative approaches. So an event like this is really good for doing that. The stuff that Catherine's talking about, I didn't know about that. It sounds absolutely amazing. And so it's kind of showcasing these sorts of things and trying to play that coordinating role to bring together different community groups, different projects, and put them together so that people can see that there are different ways of doing it and there are new things coming through. So it's a bit about sort of giving a bit of that hope and that kind of like inspiration to people to go, actually, I've tried this, it's been a bit tricky, but there's something else that's coming along, or there's another alternative, there's another approach that's been taken somewhere else, and maybe we could use that, and maybe we could try that here. And that can kind of build that momentum and that demand, I think, for these sorts of different alternatives and different ways of consuming things. And I think that stuff around, I think Jane said around more. So again, I think that's really, really important to think about, sort of shifting those attitudes, and that's, I think, a role that we can play in local authorities. I think there's also a bit of an education role around the role of the carbon impacts of plastic. So people do have that kind of blue planet effect, where people have watched the documentaries, seen the plastic pollution, they're worried about that. But sort of I'm coming more from a climate approach to this. Obviously the environmental pollution is still really important, but from a climate approach, there's carbon impacts from extracting the oil needed to make those plastics, and that's a really big driver of climate change. And so actually it's about educating on the carbon impacts of plastic. It's not just around sort of the pollution bit, it's also about the carbon impacts. And so actually, if people are worried about their carbon footprint, they need to think about the things they're consuming and that wider kind of consumption based carbon emissions, sort of going back to the one world living approach that we're part of in Richmond, thinking about the carbon impacts of everything and basically trying to normalize everything. Really, it's sort of these refill is a normal thing to do. It's not something that's sort of an exclusive thing with sort of people who fancy mason jars. It's for absolutely everybody to do, and it's a price point for everybody to do as well. It's just how you buy stuff. It's how you buy your food. It's just normal. And so our role is to try to create the momentum, I think.
Thank you, Andrew. I'd like to bring Catherine in again on that one, if I may, in terms of, how government and business can work together, or at a local level with local authorities as well.
So I guess I was going to answer it from a national perspective, which is that I think we need better supportive legislation to support the introduction and growth of reuse, whether that's more penalising of single use, whether it's open targets that people have to report against. I mean, there's lots of different policy measures, a lot of being promoted in Europe, who we will no doubt go further and faster than we will. But I honestly think unless we actually start building some legislation in, then, and actually you find that businesses are crying out for it. So I think our government thinks that business is always very anti-regulation, but I don't think people are. I think what they're saying is, if we knew that there was a target of 20, 30, 40% reuse by 2025, 2030, then we could plan for it. We could get engagement within the business, we could get investment, there would be a level playing field for everyone and they could invest, because this isn't going to happen in incremental steps. We need wholesale infrastructure change to support reuse when you're talking about the number of consumer items that would have to go through reuse. And that's never going to happen by sort of, one business here or one business there or a nice startup here. We need some proper sort of macro looking at it. So I think, my policy ask for government is actually supportive legislation.
Thank you. I think that's a really interesting point, that actually, if it's a level playing field and everyone's reached those targets, then it makes it easier for businesses to put it in place. Jane, I can see your hand is up.
Thanks. Yeah, I was just going to give you an example of how we're approaching this in Bristol. So in Bristol, we're taking a place-based approach to refill and reuse with Bristol City Council, Bristol Waste, and also the Charities fund that I mentioned, to kind of co-create this refill and reuse destination. As Catherine said, you can't really do it piecemeal and incrementally. What you really need to do is choose a place and kind of focus all your energies on there, so that as your consumer pull is happening, you're able to have the infrastructure and the products there for people to kind of pick up on. So we're working on different kinds of schemes, trying to kind of build the funding momentum behind this, trying to get partners on board so that we can do citywide behaviour change, have the infrastructure there with the solutions, and also work with Bristol Waste on the kind of bin infrastructure to help us kind of move these reusables around the city and kind of manage the product wherever it ends up, so that it doesn't end up sort of leaking into Bristol Harbour, which is a worst case scenario. So I think for me it's about building those strategic collaborations, public sector, private sector, and there's a role for NGOs and for all community groups involved here, including the brilliant refill schemes that we've got online today.
Thank you. That's really interesting to hear about that scheme, Jane. I'm sure Andrew will agree. There's kind of, in terms of the One World Living programme and the aims there's probably some really interesting learnings in terms of establishing trials within London as well. That's brilliant. So I'm going to we've got one more question, but I'm going to give everyone on the panel sort of an opportunity, this one. So before we move on to the Q&A from the floor. So if overnight you could put something new in place, really to change the landscape on single-use plastics, if you had a big idea to put in practice tomorrow, what would it be? What would your one thing be? So I am going to go to Diana first.
Well, we've talked a lot, haven't we, about the role that, say, large supermarkets have, but I think there's, we have 90% of all businesses are very small businesses in London. So I'd like to see a campaign around understanding, because I'd like to know, for example, do all those small grocery stores that dish, or market traders that dish out a plastic bag still every time you go and buy something, unless you say no, do they actually understand the implications of what they are contributing to? So to me, it's all about awareness and understanding and seeing the terrible effects that those single-use plastic bags have on the environment.
Thank you. Yeah, well, that's our number one, and we've got a campaign. Jane, I'll go to you next.
Really hard to choose just one thing, actually, but I think my dream would be, I talk to quite a lot of public sector organisations, some of you might be on today, and I often get shown the recycling rates and, oh look, we're number 5 in the country, and I would love to go into a meeting and look at somebody's reuse rates, and to have local authorities shouting about their reuse rates in the same way that they want to share the positive news about the recycling rates. So I think the key to that is around the data, and how do we develop a data set that we can benchmark across the country, so that local authorities can see their progress, and that's so motivating once you've got those figures. So that would be my one sort of dream outcome.
And yeah, that's a really interesting one, Jane. I'm making a little list here of all of these for us to work on afterwards. But yeah, that's the data question around that is really interesting. Daisy, can I come to you next?
Yes. So I would like it to be impossible to buy a single-use plastic bottle of water in London. I would like them all out, straight up. And just like for people who haven't got used to the fact of already always carrying their water bottle, there could be a loan deposit system for steel water bottles. You'd be able to pick one up, put down a deposit, just like you can borrow a bike for the day. You could borrow a water bottle for 10p in the day. You can drop it off somewhere else, and you can just fill it up through all of the fountains across the city. The fact that there are so many plastic bottles of water for sale is extraordinary. That would be mine.
Love it. Yeah, I'm all for that. Thank you. Great. So Catherine, I am going to come to you next for your one thing.
I don't know if it's a quick fix, but I would like everybody to commit to the Greenpeace target of 25% reuse by 2025. That would do me.
Yeah, all right.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, that would be great. Okay, and finally, Andrew, your one thing, please.
My thing would be, goes beyond single-use plastic, but it cuts into it is carbon emissions labelling on products, so people can see what the carbon impact is of what they're buying, in terms of thinking about the consumption and what they buy and what the impact of it is, and then including sort of like what the impact is of the packaging on the thing that you're buying as well. So you can see actually, if you're buying some strawberries, where's the impact? Is it from the packaging? Is it from the product? And you can kind of make informed choices there then, or certainly raise some awareness around it.
Yeah, again, that's a great idea. And we've got, you know, energy labeling in terms of what's in the food. So why can't we have energy labeling on what's actually, you know, the consequences of it? So yeah, I think we've got a great list there of ways forward, and things for us to think about and work on. So thank you all very much. So we've got some time left. We've got 10 minutes left for questions from the floor. So I will have a look and see what we've got coming in. Let's see. So we've got a question around, I've asked you sort of what your one big thing was, and we've got lots of policy and data ideas, but what do you think the most effective piece of action individuals can take to reduce single-use plastic would be? So I'm going to let you put your hands up for this one, and who wants to answer? Andrew.
I think buying refill is probably the most effective thing that people can do immediately. Like tomorrow, is just like buy refill stuff. That would be mine.
Great, Jane.
Yeah, I have to come in and say, download the Refill app and find places you can eat, drink and shop with less single-use plastic waste.
Absolutely. And Daisy.
Talk about it. Your average person on the street doesn't know that a plastic bottle of water is, by buying that, they're supporting fossil fuels. Talk about it with everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Thank you. So we've got time for a couple more. So let me see. We've got so a question for Catherine, actually. Can the Refill Coalition system, whether it's a turnkey or a modular option, be used by independent foodstuffs retailers, or is it just for large supermarkets?
I was just trying to answer that. Yes, of course. We just had to start with the big guns because they're the ones that can afford to develop it. But yes, the whole idea is that any wholesaler, any retailer, it's really about the wholesaler and the supply chain that's going to solve it really. So yeah, once we've got through the trial, then anyone can engage with it.
Great, yeah, and I think it's such an exciting thing to hear about. I'm sure lots of people here are very pleased to hear that that's the case. Okay, so let me find another question. This is an interesting one. Actually, would the panel comment on single-use plastic versus single-use anything else? Because we have to be careful not to demonize a material that may be a great reuse system for the infrastructure. So yeah, is it about plastic, or is it single-use plastic? Bettina.
Oops, yeah, I'm off mute. Of course, plastic, you know, it's an amazing substance, it's an amazing product, but it's just been used so incorrectly. You know, a plastic stent in your heart, marvelous, brilliant. Let's not get rid of those. You know, plastic covering a coconut, covering every single piece of fruit, covering, you know, just ludicrous examples of things. Not so, you know, I don't want to demonize all plastics. You know, they've really revolutionized the world. You know, they've modernized the world in incredible ways, but it's just gone too far. You know, we just need to step back and kind of go, hang on a minute, this is a great product, but you know, it's victim of its own success, really. We need to step away.
Yes, we didn't know what we knew. Well, we didn't know what we know now when we invented plastic, did we? Andrew.
Just agreeing with Bettina, really, is that plastic's a great material for lots and lots of different things. It's why it's so prevalent everywhere, but it's just sort of, as I mentioned in the presentation, it's around changing that perception that it's a precious material that we don't want to make any more of, and we need to reuse it and use it in the correct way and not waste it, because it's really, really important and really, really useful. But in terms of sort of alternatives, this is something that came out in discussions when we're kind of pulling together the action plan, which is that the alternatives need to be lower carbon as well. So it's kind of like, if you're switching away from single-use plastic, you do need to make sure that whatever is there is sort of a lower carbon solution, and that's really important as well, that we're not kind of raising carbon emissions by switching away to a different material which actually is more carbon intensive. And so it's kind of trying to find a balance. It's quite complex and there's a lot of factors within that, but it's still something that does need to be borne in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's why refill is so important as well, isn't it? Because it takes that question away from people as to whether a can is better than a bottle, and things actually just have your own bottle and fill it up and then it's not a question. Okay, thank you. I did see another interesting question. Let me find it again now. So oh, you may have answered it already around the what the government can do, as well as taxing, what other policy issues they could focus on.
I just put a link. There's a really great European policy document on that that's not too heavyweight. It's only like 4 or 5 pages. But it's effectively sort of saying, how can we get single use to fund the development of reuse in various different ways. But it's a really great set of recommendations that if we all followed, I think we'd be in a much better position.
Great, thank you for that, Catherine. Okay, so we've got another question about the Refill Coalition, actually, about well, and refill in general, but it's great to hear that the steps are being made in terms of the area of refill. But can cross-contamination be fully eliminated for food allergies?
We're working on it. I mean, the reality is that any time you dispense a product and it goes into the air, then you've got a risk of airborne allergies. However, I would say just because we can't achieve perfection right at the start doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing everything that we're doing. You know, there's a lot of things that aren't affected by that we can try and solve, whilst also we are trying to keep in mind lots and lots of accessibility questions, whether it's allergens, disability, people who don't have digital access, things like that. So we're trying to keep a lot of that stuff in mind, but we aren't going to be able to solve every problem at the start.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, great, thank you. Yeah, like so, we can't solve everything at the start. It doesn't mean that we don't try and solve as much as we can each time. Jane.
Yeah, and just that question, but applied to a sort of food to go cafe context, because that obviously came up quite a lot during COVID. You know, as long as cafes are following public health guidance and, you know, they are inspected and they're using, you know, industrial grade, or they're washing their reusables at the right temperature and they're being dried, you know, there's no reason to assume that there's any more risk of single use than there would be from reuse.
Great, thank you. So I can see we've got a follow-on question from our point around single use versus plastic per se. So what should be made of plastic and why? I think, Catherine, you may have just answered that one.
I mean, I was trying. There's no perfect answer. Sally and I have talked about this a lot. There is no perfect answer, but I mean, to me, it's about reuse versus single use, not materials. You know, single use glass is an emissions catastrophe. Like, we've got to stop. You can't just switch things out in that sense. So I would say it's like, let's focus on creating packaging that can be reused X amount of times, you know, as proved, and that would be a good place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, in terms of the carbon emissions from transporting single-use glass, I know it's so much higher, so it's not always that it's the right switch, as we said. Okay, let's see. Do we have any other questions from the floor? So how can we make refill and reuse cheaper than new purchases? I think we have touched on that already, but I don't know if anyone wanted to add anything on that. I know, Catherine, you had some interesting points around that in terms of whether we should expect things to be cheaper or how we might be able to subsidise cost.
Yeah, I think it's about the stepping stone. You know, you've got to get to can you get to price parity or cheaper for refill and reuse once you're at a steady state, once you're at scale? And then how do you manage the transition to get there? I don't have any of the answers to this, but that's the way I try and frame it.
Thank you. Diana, did you want to come in?
I was just going to add, I mean, from a consumer's perspective, I think there has to be a difference in the price point, and it's quite minimal at the moment. So, you know, I think on coffee, you may get it 25p cheaper or something. I think it should be bigger, actually. And I think, you know, I know it's a revenue and profit issue for businesses, but that's the only way you're going to change people's behaviour is at the moment with the cost of living crisis, is make it cost effective for them. So I think businesses could be doing more.
Yeah, I have to say that was the thing that finally convinced my husband to get a refill cup, was the 50p discount from Pret. Daisy, did you want to come in?
Yeah, exactly the same. It won't become widespread and normal until it's the cheapest option.
Andrew?
It's just on the coffee cup thing and about making things the default option. So it's like your option, the first thing that what's automatically presented to you is the low carbon and sustainable option. And we talk about that a lot within sort of our wider climate work that we do within the council. So how can we make it so that things are by default, and we can design things and create an environment and a place that is by default sustainable? And it's this stuff around coffee cups. You should have to pay extra. It's not you get a discount for bringing a reusable coffee cup. The assumption is you have a reusable coffee cup. If you don't have one, it's 50p extra to buy a coffee cup. Or as I went to Central London and Monmouth Coffee, who do fantastic coffee. I went there and they do not do disposable cups anymore. You go in and it's kind of like, are you taking away? Can I have your reusable cup? If not, here's a £5 deposit you need to pay for a reusable cup, and you can either keep it or you can bring it back and you get your £5 back. It's the absolute default. And so everybody, all these tourists who are in Borough Market are using them, and that's the kind of the default it's got to be. And that's where you get that shift, where it's the option you have to take.
Yeah, that's great. I can see Daisy cheering there, and I'm cheering inwardly too for that one. That sounds brilliant. I'm just aware of the time, so I'm sure that we could all talk for a lot longer about single-use plastic. But as we are at 2:15, I will draw us to a close. And I just wanted to thank all of our panel members for your participation today. It's been such an interesting and inspiring session to hear about all the different ways in which this challenge is being addressed, and I'm very sure that everyone listening will go away feeling inspired and encouraged that so much progress is already being made and that we know what we're going to do next. I'd like to encourage everyone who has been listening to think about the points that our speakers have made today, and take action where you can, either by downloading the Refill app, by joining one of Plastic Free Hackney's sessions, by getting in touch with Diana or Catherine, and if you're a local authority, get in touch with Andrew on the One World Living. There's something that everyone can do, even if it's just, as Daisy said, talking to someone that you haven't spoken to about this problem before, because the more people understand it, the more people will take action. And as I think we've demonstrated today, it's going to take everyone from local to national to make this happen. So thanks again to everyone for listening and for your questions. And I'd like to wish you all a very happy rest of World Refill Day.